It is January 15th, 1947, a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. The city is still waking up. A woman named Betty Bersinger is taking a morning walk through the Leimert Park neighborhood with her 3-year-old daughter. The street is quiet. The air is cold. And then she sees something in a vacant lot, just a few feet from the sidewalk. At first, she thinks it is a mannequin, a store display, maybe discarded overnight. She slows down. She looked again. It is not a mannequin. It is a young woman, 22 years old. Her body is completely nude and positioned in the grass with a disturbing, almost deliberate precision. Her arms raised over her head, bent at the elbows. Her legs straight and slightly apart, and her body has been cut completely in half at the waist. There is no blood anywhere on the ground, not a single drop, because she was not killed here. She was killed somewhere else, washed, cleaned, and then transported to this spot and posed, as if on display. Betty Bersinger ran to a nearby house and called the police. When investigators arrived, they found something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The cuts on the body were not the work of someone in a rage. They were precise, surgical. Whoever did this had anatomical knowledge, and they had taken their time. The victim's face had also been slashed at both corners of her mouth, extending toward her ears in what the press would describe as a grotesque, permanent smile. Within days, the newspapers had a name for her. They called her the Black Dahlia. Her real name was Elizabeth Short, and her murder became the most infamous unsolved case in American history. Over 750 investigators, over 150 official suspects, more than 60 false confessions, and after 77 years, not a single arrest. But here is what most people don't realize. This case is full of threads that were never fully pulled. Evidence that raises more questions than it answers. Suspects with disturbing credibility. And at least one recorded conversation that should have ended this case, but somehow didn't. Today, we are not going to just tell you what happened. We are going to open the case file together. I'll show you what I found, and at the end, I want to know what you see that I might have missed. Because the person who killed Elizabeth Short may have been protected, and that is a thread worth pulling. Who was Elizabeth Short? Before she was a headline, before she was a nickname, Elizabeth Short was a person. And understanding who she really was, not who the newspapers invented, is the first step in understanding what happened to her. She was born on July 29, 1924, in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. She was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her childhood was not easy. Her father lost most of his savings in the 1929 stock market crash. Then, in 1930, his car was found abandoned near the Charlestown Bridge, and the family assumed he had jumped into the river below. He hadn't jumped. He had simply walked away from his life. Elizabeth grew up believing her father was dead. She struggled with respiratory illness as a child, and doctors recommended she spend time in warmer climates. So she developed a habit of traveling, staying with friends, acquaintances, and strangers in Florida and California during the winters. By the time she was a teenager, she was comfortable relying on people she barely knew. In 1942, she discovered her father was alive. Living in Vallejo, California, she moved in with him. It did not go well. Within months, they had a falling out over her lifestyle, and she left. Elizabeth drifted. She worked as a waitress, a clerk, a cashier. In January 1943, she applied for a job at the Army Commissary at Camp Cook in California, which is how her fingerprints ended up in the FBI database. 7 months later, she was arrested in Santa Barbara for underage drinking, which is how her mugshot ended up there too. These 2 records would later allow investigators to identify her body within hours. She was described by those who knew her as friendly, charming, and deeply secretive about her past. She told different people, different stories about who she was and where she came from. She was beautiful. With naturally dark hair she dyed jet black and light blue eyes, standing 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 115 pounds. Now here is something worth noting. Almost every account of Elizabeth Short describes her as an aspiring actress who came to Hollywood to chase stardom. And that story is almost entirely a media fabrication. There is no evidence whatsoever that Elizabeth ever attended an audition, took an acting class, or had professional headshots taken. She never had a single acting credit. The aspiring actress narrative was created by newspapers because it fit the image of Los Angeles perfectly. The real Elizabeth Short was something more complicated, a young woman living on the margins, dependent on the generosity of strangers, trying to figure out her place in the world. In the fall of 1946, she was staying in San Diego with a family who had taken her in, but by December, their patience was running thin. She needed to move on. And that is where a man named Robert Manley comes in. On January 8, 1947, a married 25-year-old traveling salesman named Robert "Red" Manley, so called for the color of his hair, drove to San Diego to pick up Elizabeth Short and offer her a ride back to Los Angeles. They spent the night in a motel. Manley would later tell investigators that they slept in separate beds and did not have a sexual relationship. The next morning, January 9th, he drove her to the Los Angeles Greyhound bus station, where she checked her luggage. Then he took her to the Biltmore Hotel on Pershing Square in downtown Los Angeles. He later described what she was wearing in precise detail: a fluffy white blouse with a black collarless suit, high-heeled suede shoes, nylon stockings, white gloves, and a full-length beige coat. He left her in the lobby at approximately 6:30 p.m. Elizabeth Short had told Manley she was there to meet her sister, who was visiting from Boston. But here is the first thing that doesn't add up. Her sister was not visiting from Boston. Elizabeth knew this when she said it. So why did she lie to Manley? Who was she actually going to meet? Biltmore Hotel staff recalled seeing her use the lobby telephone repeatedly over the next several hours, making call after call. No one who knew her reported receiving a call from her that night. So who was she calling? At approximately 10 p.m., she left the Biltmore. A single witness placed her at the corner of 7th and Olive Streets, just a couple of blocks south of the hotel, getting into a car that then sped away. After that, for 6 days, nothing. This became known as the missing week. For a long time, investigators suggested Elizabeth had simply vanished without witnesses. But investigative author Steve Hodel, who spent years on this case, has claimed in his published research that 14 witnesses documented seeing Elizabeth Short on various days during that week. The last being an LAPD officer named Merrill McBride, who reportedly saw her on January 14th, the day before her body was found. If that is accurate, and it is a claim worth scrutinizing carefully, then Elizabeth was not simply a ghost during those 6 days. She was moving around Los Angeles. She was seen by people who knew her, which raises the question, why were those witness accounts not pursued more aggressively, and where exactly was she going? On the morning of January 15, 1947, Betty Bersinger found what was left of her. The autopsy was performed on January 16, 1947. What it revealed was deeply disturbing, not just in terms of how violent the crime was, but in terms of what it told us about the person who committed it. Elizabeth Short's official cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage and shock caused by blows to the head and face. She had been tortured before she died. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, indicating she had been bound. Lacerations were found on her right breast. The marks on her body were consistent with someone who had been held captive and tortured over a period of time. Then there was the bisection. Her body had been cut cleanly in half at the waist, using a procedure that forensic experts identified as a hemicorporectomy. The cuts were precise. There were no jagged edges, no hesitation marks. The person who did this knew exactly what they were doing. They were familiar with human anatomy. Investigators immediately began looking at surgeons, doctors, and medical students as potential suspects. The FBI even reviewed student records from the University of Southern California Medical School. The body had been completely drained of blood and washed, likely with gasoline, which also destroyed any fingerprint evidence, before being transported to the lot on Norton Avenue and carefully positioned. Her organs had been removed and then replaced. Her skin had been scrubbed clean. Think about what this means. This was not a crime of passion. Nobody loses control, then takes the time to drain a body of blood, wash it with gasoline, perform a surgical bisection, carefully reposition internal organs, transport the body across the city, and pose it with deliberate precision in plain sight on a public street. This was planned, methodical, and the positioning, arms raised, legs apart, body displayed near the sidewalk, was almost certainly intentional communication. This person wanted the body to be found. They wanted the world to see what they had done. Why? Near the body, investigators found a heel print in the soil and tire tracks. A cement sack containing watery blood was also discovered nearby. That was essentially all the physical evidence at the scene. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, no witnesses to the disposal. And then, the killer made contact. On January 21, 1947, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. The caller said he was Elizabeth Short's killer. He congratulated the paper on its coverage of the case and said he planned to eventually turn himself in, but not yet. He wanted police to pursue him further. 3 days later, on January 24th, a package arrived at the Examiner's offices. It contained Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, several photographs of her, a clipping about a soldier named Matt Gordon she had been romantically linked to, and an address book belonging not to Elizabeth but to a man named Mark Hansen who had been one of her acquaintances in Los Angeles. Several pages of the address book had been torn out. Everything in that package had been soaked in gasoline, every fingerprint destroyed. Here is what makes this detail fascinating. The killer kept Elizabeth's personal documents. For days, he had her birth certificate, her social security card, her photographs. That is intimate. That is possessive. And then he chose to send them back. Not to her family, not to police, but to a newspaper. This is someone who craved an audience. Someone who was performing. Why Mark Hansen's address book? What was the killer trying to say by including it? And why were those specific pages torn out? More letters followed, made from cut-and-pasted newspaper clippings. One read, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Another read, "You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." Justified. That word has stayed with investigators and researchers for decades. What did this person believe Elizabeth Short had done to deserve what happened to her? The LAPD investigation became the largest in Los Angeles since 1927. Over 750 investigators were assigned. More than 192 suspects were officially investigated and cleared. Over 60 people confessed, none credibly. And the media circus was so overwhelming that reporters were sometimes at crime scenes before detectives could properly secure them. But of all the suspects who emerged over 7 decades, 3 stand out as genuinely compelling for very different reasons. Suspect 1, Robert "Red" Manley. Manley was the obvious starting point. He was the last confirmed person to see Elizabeth Short alive. He was a married man who had been secretly dating her. He had motive, proximity, and opportunity. He was brought in for questioning and passed multiple polygraph tests. His alibi, that he was on a business trip and had documented sales calls throughout the week, was verified. He was ultimately released without charge. Manley spent the rest of his life haunted by the association. He later suffered a mental breakdown and was committed to a psychiatric institution. He maintained his innocence until his death. Manley is almost certainly not the killer. The precision of the crime scene is simply inconsistent with a salesman with no known medical knowledge. But here is something that rarely gets discussed. Elizabeth lied to him about why she was going to the Biltmore. If she was hiding who she was meeting, she was hiding it from someone. Was she afraid of Manley? Or was she protecting the person she was actually going to see? Suspect 2, Dr. George Hodel. This is the name that has dominated the case for the last 2 decades. George Hodel was a brilliant and well-connected physician in Los Angeles, a man who moved in the highest circles of the city's entertainment, political, and law enforcement elite. He was cultured, charming, and deeply sinister beneath the surface. In 1949, he was tried and acquitted for sexually assaulting his own teenage daughter, Tamar. Prior to the Dahlia case, he had also been investigated, though never charged, in connection with the death of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding. The case against George Hodel was built publicly by his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective who initially set out to clear his father's name after his death, and instead became convinced his father was the killer. Steve Hodel's evidence is striking. George Hodel had surgical training, consistent with the precision of the bisection. He had been a suspect at the time of the original investigation, and in 2004, previously unreleased Los Angeles District Attorney files were discovered in a vault, pointing to George Hodel as the primary suspect. Most compellingly, investigators had wiretapped George Hodel's home in 1949. In the recordings, Hodel was captured saying to an unidentified visitor, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." Let that sit for a moment. A recorded conversation obtained by investigators in which George Hodel appeared to acknowledge killing Elizabeth Short and then noted that they couldn't prove it. That recording existed. It was in official files, and George Hodel was never charged. He left the United States in 1950 and lived in the Philippines for the next 40 years, returning to America in 1990. He died in 1999. Steve Hodel believes his father's powerful connections in entertainment, politics, and law enforcement allowed him to escape prosecution. In 2026, author William J. Mann argued against Hodel, noting there is no convincing evidence that George Hodel and Elizabeth Short ever met. Investigators who built a nearly comprehensive timeline of Elizabeth's final weeks in Los Angeles found no overlap with Hodel. So here is the thread I want you to pull on. If that wiretap recording existed, and it did, it is documented. Why was it not enough to at least bring Hodel in for formal questioning? Was it the quality of the recording, his connections, or something else? I don't have a clean answer, but I find it very difficult to look at that recorded statement and not wonder what really happened in those DA files before they disappeared into a vault for 50 years. Suspect 3, the Mark Hansen connection. Mark Hansen was a nightclub owner in Hollywood who had known Elizabeth Short. His address book, not hers, was in the package the killer sent to the Examiner. This has never been adequately explained. Some researchers, including crime writer Joan Eatwell, have pointed to a man named Leslie Dillon as a compelling suspect. Dillon was an acquaintance of Hansen who had claimed to be writing a book about the Dahlia case, a book that never materialized. According to Eatwell's research, a motel owner named Henry Hoffman reported that on the morning of January 15, 1947, he found one of his cabins covered in blood and fecal matter. In a separate cabin, a bundle of women's clothing had been left behind. Eatwell believes that motel was the actual murder scene, and she believes Dillon was never charged because of Hansen's connections to certain LAPD officers. The Astor Motel detail is one of the most underreported pieces of this case. A blood-soaked cabin found on the same morning the body was discovered near the University of Southern California, and it reportedly led nowhere. Why? Was it properly investigated? Was the connection to Elizabeth Short ever conclusively ruled out? This is the kind of detail that disappears in a case this large. But it shouldn't. The last detective to officially work the Black Dahlia case was Ralph Asdell, who was 26 years old when the murder occurred. He died on December 31, 2003. The case remains officially open with the LAPD, but it is functionally inactive. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short is almost certainly dead. The window for criminal justice closed long ago. But the questions have not closed, and some of them are deeply uncomfortable. Why did Elizabeth lie to Manley about who she was meeting at the Biltmore? Who was she calling from those lobby telephones for hours? Who picked her up at 7th and Olive at 10 p.m. and sped away into the night? Why did the killer send Mark Hansen's address book, not Elizabeth's, to the newspaper? What was in the pages that were torn out? Why did it take 50 years for those DA files pointing to George Hodel to surface? And why, when a wiretap captured what appears to be a near confession, was no formal action taken? Was there corruption in the LAPD? Elizabeth Short moved in circles that overlapped with powerful men, nightclub owners, physicians, politicians. Did someone with connections ensure the investigation never reached certain doors? And the detail that I cannot stop thinking about, the body was positioned in plain sight, feet from a public sidewalk, in a neighborhood that was largely undeveloped but not remote. The killer could have hidden this body far more effectively. They chose not to. They wanted it found. They wanted attention. They sent letters to newspapers. They made a phone call to taunt investigators. This was someone who believed they were untouchable. Why did they believe that? I've spent a lot of time with this case. And my honest conclusion is this: I don't believe this case was simply unsolvable. I believe there were points, particularly around the Hodel investigation and the DA files, where it could have been taken further and wasn't. Whether that was incompetence, corruption, or something else, I genuinely don't know, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I do know is that Elizabeth Short deserved better, from the killer, from the investigation, and from the media that turned her death into entertainment without ever really trying to understand who she was. Her name was Elizabeth Short. She was 22 years old, she liked to wear black clothing, and she had jet black hair, and she smiled easily. People who knew her said she was warm and funny and evasive about her past. She was not an actress. She was not an adventuress. She was a young woman trying to survive in a city that was indifferent to her. She was murdered in the most brutal way imaginable, and the person responsible was never held accountable. And 77 years later, we are still here, still asking the same questions. Now it's your turn. Here are the questions I want you to sit with. Number 1. The wiretap recording. George Hodel was captured on a wiretap, appearing to acknowledge killing Elizabeth Short, and noted they couldn't prove it. That recording existed in official files. Why do you think he was never formally charged? Do you think it was his connections? Or is there another explanation? Number 2. The address book. The killer sent Mark Hansen's address book to the Examiner, not Elizabeth's. Several pages were torn out. That detail has always felt like a message to me. What do you think the killer was trying to communicate, and to whom? Number 3. The positioning. The body was placed in plain view, near a sidewalk, in a deliberate pose. The killer could have hidden it. They chose not to. What does that tell you about who this person was? Drop your theories in the comments. I read every single one, and if you find something I missed, a detail, a connection, a piece of evidence, tell me. Because the best discoveries in cases like this don't always come from detectives. Sometimes they come from people who are simply paying attention. If this investigation is the kind of thing you want more of, cases we dig into together rather than just narrate at you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because next time, we are opening another file that has been sitting in the dark for far too long.